just days after a young California man with a long and documented history of mental illness killed a half-dozen other young adults and then killed himself. Some California lawmakers want to make it easier for the police and for the courts to think ahead and anticipate bloodshed before it happens, thereby preventing it. Classmates, friends, and families of the murdered UC Santa Barbara students gathered late yesterday in their honor. By now you know 3 were fatally stabbed in the killer's apartment in the community of Isla Vista last Friday. 2 others were shot to death at a sorority house, and a 6th was killed at a convenience shop. And Delhi, that student's father, has channeled his all-consuming anguish into a passionate demand for new and tougher gun laws and contempt for politicians who do little but offer their regrets.
I've had congresspeople call me and express their condolences and sympathy. And when that's happened, I've told them, don't call me and tell me you're sorry about my son's death. I don't want to hear it from you. I don't want to hear that you're sorry about my son's death. I don't care if you're sorry about my son's death. You go back to Congress and you do something, and you come back to me and tell me you've done something, then I'd be interested in talking to you. But till then, don't call me again. And I don't care whether it's the President of the United States or any other politician. Do not call me and tell me you're sorry about my son's death until you do something now. It's ridiculous. It's contemptible. The fact that this situation has gone on so long is just utterly ridiculous.
That was Richard Martinez talking to our Anderson Cooper here on CNN. But as I mentioned, some politicians are taking action. In California, 2 state assembly members and a state senator are pushing legislation that would give relatives, friends, and, quote, intimate partners the same power that therapists have to alert the police when someone, potentially the next Elliot Rodger, poses a threat to himself or to someone else. Police could then investigate. And this is crucial. They could then seek a court order that would bar that person from buying or owning guns. Let me repeat that. A court order that would bar someone from is essentially what people will say is their Second Amendment right, and there is the controversy. One of the sponsors of that measure is Assemblyman Das Williams, and I'm also joined by my legal team, CNN commentator and legal analyst Mel Robbins and HLN legal analyst Joey Jackson. Assemblyman, I'd like to begin with you. You know, at first blush, some people would say it sounds like a good idea, but then you hear the controversy. You hear the issue about the Second Amendment. It is a guaranteed constitutional right. So if your amendment is the solution, why isn't it already legislation?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I think the father, Richard Martinez, is right. Why haven't we done something before nationwide? And how many mass killings have to occur before we are spurred to action? And I, for one, do not want to let California not move forward. I think that if you don't believe that guns should be removed from people who are mentally unstable or mentally ill, you're not going to agree with my legislation. Of course, I think most people agree that we do not want to have guns in the hands of people who are mentally ill or mentally unstable, and this was the least invasive way that we could determine to do that.
Mr. Williams, there are those out there listening right now who would wholeheartedly agree with your position, and there are others who would say, you're coming for my guns and I'm a law-abiding citizen, and this kind of legislation would give someone who may have a different incentive, let's say, something retributive, to report me falsely to the police. Thereby they'd get my guns and I'd have to prove my innocence. What would you say to those people?
Well, we tried to balance both public safety and speed and the need to have a process that moves quickly with due process. And so there is a requirement in the legislation to have a hearing where the person in question who is being said of is mentally unstable and should not possess weapons, that individual could come before the court and profess that they are in good state of mind and keep their Second Amendment rights. I think that we have to, in this democratic society, trust judicial discretion at some level. If we don't, we can't trust our system at all.
But it takes the judicial discretion, and effectively what you're saying, and this is a domestic restraining order, because effectively, if you have a domestic restraining order slapped on you, your freedom's not taken away. You just can't go contact that person who's worried until you prove that you are not a threat. In this respect, they take your gun away, or they take your right to own a gun away until you go to the judicial authority and prove your case. And that's where I'm wondering if you don't find you're going to see an uphill battle with a very strong lobby. Effectively, what are the odds you think this kind of a bill can prevail when on Capitol Hill you can't even get background checks?
Well, if I was in Congress, I would be much more daunted about getting this passed. But I think here in California, people have determined that enough is enough. We're sick and tired of people dying in mass killings, and that it is not intrusive if the judge still has discretion over the matter at the end of the day. And we believe that in this case, I'm not omniscient. I can't tell you for sure that the tragedy would have been avoided. But what's unique about this case is that the mother and father knew there was going to be a problem. And at this point, in current law, there's no way for them to do something about it. This would give parents, spouses, loved ones the ability to intervene, and if a judge determines that that individual that they're worried about is a danger to themselves or others, to be able to prevent a suicide, a homicide, or a mass killing.
I don't think anybody would question your motives and the laudable end that you're seeking. It's the struggle that you'll have in getting there. I just want to quote you something that comes from someone who tried to be a politician, ran to be a politician, did not prevail, but is nonetheless quite famous in politician circles. It's Joe Wurzelbacher, and maybe people would recognize the name Plummer. He wrote an open letter to the parents of the victims who were killed, effectively the parents of the children who were killed by gunfire in this rampage. I just want to excerpt a small bit of it. As harsh as this sounds, your dead kids don't trump my constitutional rights. This is a direct quote. It goes on to say, Mr. Martinez and anyone calling for more restrictions on Americans' rights need to back off and stop playing into the hands of the folks who merely capitalize on these horrific events for their own political ends. He goes on to say, they don't care about your family or your dead children at all. I want that to ruminate over the break, because I'm going to ask my legal guests about that. I'm also going to ask the Assemblyman what he thinks about that, because that is an effective and it is a strong feeling out there, and that is the road to hoe for those who want this kind of a bill passed. After the break, you'll hear about that. Welcome back. Right before the break, I read some choice words from a letter that was just released by Joe the Plumber, in which it's a letter to the family members who lost children to the gun violence in Santa Barbara, effectively saying, your dead kids don't trump my constitutional rights. Harsh indeed. Admittedly so, from Joe the Plumber. Mr. Assemblyman, I'd love it if you'd stand by. We have Des Williams with us from California, who is introducing legislation to make it easier to get what's effectively considered to be a gun prevention restraining order for those who might be considered dangerous by friends or family. Mel Robinson, Joey Jackson, you're here. I said this is a tough road to hoe, because there are people who feel so strongly about the Second Amendment that this kind of language, your dead kids don't trump my rights, is fine to them just days after all of these people have lost their children. That's why I say this is tough. Do you see any shot, even in California?
Absolutely. And look, Joe the Plumber lost the election with that kind of rhetoric. He may be a mouthpiece for the NRA, but that's going to be who California's up against. But let's put this into perspective. California has some of the toughest gun control laws in the country. They already have a 10-day waiting period. They already have a 30-day waiting period between guns. They already have a federal and a state background check. They already have safety training that's required. And so on the
list, but guess what? This kid passed all that and killed all those others.
I got it, but you know what? Here's the thing that's troubling, is that the police showed up, right, at this murderer's house, and there were 6 of them there, and that was the one opportunity we had to thwart this from happening. And the problem is that based on the laws right now, particularly with mental health, Ashley, they didn't have the authority to take them into custody. They also didn't have the authority to do any kind of search or seize any kind of guns. To me, this is a necessary step.
The warrant.
Yes, it 100% is.
So you were here yesterday. We had that conversation about the warrant. But when the Assemblyman wants something like a restraining order on your ability to buy and own guns, it's different than the warrant to go in and look to see if you have any.
Okay.
Or would it give you that?
Let's be clear about a couple of things. We do have constitutional rights. We enjoy them. It's a beautiful country. You don't have the right, the constitutional right, to kill anybody. You don't have it. If it's self-defense, it's another matter. However, acting out this legislation, it requires responsible gun ownership. What is the matter with responsible gun ownership? Should a person who's been receiving therapy since they were 8 years old have a gun in hand when the therapy has been constant? Let's look at the list. Columbine Massacre, 1999. Virginia Tech, 2007. Tucson shooting, 2011. Aurora, 2012. Sandy Hook, 2012 again. What is it going to take? What the Assemblyman's measure provides, it's not taking guns away from people. It's not stripping rights against anybody. People should be responsible who have weapons. Everyone would agree with that proposition.
And here's the other thing, Ashley. Right now, we have no way, once somebody gets a gun legally, there's absolutely no mechanism to be able to take a gun away. So you read about all these stories. Forget about mass murder. What about domestic violence? What about people that commit acts of violence every day in this country, people that are unstable? There's no mechanism for the police or for the public or for a mental health professional to basically say, we need to take a look at this individual, just like we might yank somebody's driver's license for acting recklessly.
And one
right?
of the brief points.
And then there's a hearing. Due process is not a problem here because there is a hearing. We suspend your right to get a gun. We suspend your right to own a gun. You can show up at a hearing, and now the burden is on you to prove to us that you are going to be a responsible gun owner.
And that's the deal. And one other point to be made. The police were there at his home, okay? The Roger person who massacred innocent, beautiful people, okay? The police should not be in the business of making mental health assessments. They should not be. Police, as wonderful and as heroic as they are, do not have the ability of a psychotherapist to analyze a person on the spot and make a determination whether they should be eligible for a civil commitment.
You know,
they can't do it. Someone else needs to. I think this measure that the Assemblyman has is a positive step forward. It's about time that it passes. And Mr. Martinez, God bless him. That's a father who's grieving.
Yes.
That's a father who's broken. That's a father who's hurt. And God bless him for coming forward and taking people to task to do something so that massacres don't occur
legislators
again.
doing something that's reasonable.
I will say this. You know, when we see Mr. Martinez speak the way he does, this is a pain that many of us, most of us, will never, ever experience.
Thank God.
I'm just going to give an open letter to you, Mr. Joe the Plumber. Doesn't matter what your point is. There are a lot of people who agree with the Second Amendment, and you are doing them no favors by attacking that man, a grieving father. And God help you if your child comes to you and is worried about a kid in class. What will you do, Joe the Plumber? What will you do? Will you write a letter like this to yourself? Still to come.